but of his whole passport, including a multiple entry visa, which was, if you want to prevent attacks inside the United States, that's the sort of thing you want the FBI to have. It was withheld. I would say it is certainly the case. It was withheld. Wilshire was responsible for the withholding. And now when it comes to Richard Clarke's statement, I'm a bit of a disadvantage because I was on an Alaska cruise until Friday, and I have not seen a newspaper or had internet for about 2 weeks. But I did yesterday see a reply from 3 very interesting people. First being George Tenet, the second being Cofer Black, and the third being Richard Blee. His name is now out in the public, although it was really Fenton who discovered it, saying that Clarke was wrong. And if I remember the statement correctly, they said it is not true that the information was withheld from Richard Clarke. Well, I know that the information was withheld from the FBI. If my memory of their statement is correct, it's a very interesting wording because it's the kind of deception that the CIA likes to indulge in. It's almost implying that it was not withheld from Richard Clarke, but maybe it was withheld from some other people. And I was arguing the other way, it was definitely withheld from the FBI. And I don't know if it was withheld from Richard Clarke or not, because he was one of the most important people in what is called the Cofer-Clarke-Blee plan to conduct covert operations together with Massoud and the Northern Alliance.
Thank you very much. The last one. According to your opinion, Tom Wilshire has been sent to FBI in July, on July of 2001, in order to control FBI, in order to avoid that FBI could do something against the terrorists, because he was sent suddenly to FBI direction center, and he did not inform the staff of FBI about his knowledge about terrorism.
That's correct.
My English is wrong, but you have understood what I mean.
Yes, totally, and that is exactly what Fenton is saying in his book. When he says something more, it's not just that Wilshire continued to block information from the FBI, but he started to put things into the files which would make it look as if he had been interested in getting the FBI to look at the 2 Saudis. But he did it in such a way that everything was routine, everything had to go to A before it went to B. And there is this huge delay in the FBI getting to things. But there's a paper trail now in the records which is saying it's not Wilshire's fault because he actually ordered an FBI investigation on this matter. So, and I want to remind you of Fenton's conclusion is that Blee's and Wilshire's motives had changed by the summer of 2001, that they were covering things up because they knew that the attack was imminent, and they wanted to make sure that these people were not rounded up before the attack, which would have then made 9/11 impossible. So it's a very serious and important charge.
Professor Johnson.
I'm very interested in the concept of the events. You indicated that certain activities were accelerated or increased at certain periods before some of these attacks. Is there any way that we could hope to predict deep events that's one question. I know this is kind of a theoretical question, but if there are other 9/11s waiting for us out there, we would certainly want to try to predict and perhaps prevent them.
Well, the first time, I think it was, I actually went to Washington in 1986, 87, excuse me, in connection with Iran-Contra, which was a series of deep events of sorts, although not structurally deep events. They were not as serious as 9/11. And I said in writing at that time, I didn't use the phrase deep events, but I said we've become accustomed to these interventions into American history by apparently marginal people like Lee Harvey Oswald, and they have become a recurring pattern happening about once every decade, and I did say I think we can expect more of them, and of course this was 14 years before 1911. Not a very precise prediction, but I think that as long as we have a war machine in Washington, and every time it needs a war, it gets its war by deep events. I didn't say anything about Remember the Maine or Pearl Harbor. I'm just focusing, since 1950, every single major U.S. war has been predicted by one. And I do believe in a certain kind of rhythm to history. You know, you have a war, and then everyone hates war, and no more war, and then things become more and more frustrating, and we get an economic downturn, and pretty soon it looks like the only way we're going to get out of the Depression is another war. So if we go into that kind of repeat of the 1930s, then we will have another deep event. But I'm afraid I can't tell you the day, the year, the perpetrators.
Thank you, Professor Johnson. We are at noon. Maybe we could, there's a very pressing last question. Professor Jenkins.
Mr. Scott, I'm going to take refuge in a cosmic question. Is there a place in a well-functioning democracy for secret agencies with the order of the CIA? Or put in another way, can you conceive of a way to have effective oversight over these agencies? Is it possible to open up these agencies to some kind of continuous scrutiny? Or is that simply not possible because of the nature of the necessary secretive dimension of their functioning?
Well, it's a very good question. I'm glad you asked it. And I thought about it a great deal. And like many people, I think we have to make a distinction between the secret collection of intelligence and sharing of intelligence and covert operations. If we go back to the history of the CIA, it was created for intelligence. And then I mentioned, but didn't go into the details, but I do at some length in American War Machine. A year later, separately, you had the creation of the so-called Office of Policy Coordination, OPC. That was a covert operations agency, which is, I would say, the #1 source of the terrible problems that American foreign policy's got. My whole book is a tracing of how this led to the building up, not just collaboration with, but the building up of the narcotics traffic in first Southeast Asia, and then in Laos, and then eventually in Afghanistan. It's all the heirs of the OPC, including a man most of you haven't heard of, Colonel Stilwell, who together with Ted Shackley, who was a disciple of one of the lead OPC people, they helped set up JSOC in what is now SOCOM. And SOCOM, I think, is more dangerous now than the CIA, and is actually writing books against the CIA as being too namby-pamby, etc. I think that there is no compatibility between secret covert operations and democracy. I think there is compatibility with intelligence that goes, it's always dangerous. Anything secret is dangerous. And the trouble is that